Welcome to Within the Frame, where we delve into the most up-to-date issues across the globe. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. In the Middle East, Israel is continuing its offensive into Gaza, even after eliminating Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar. The Gaza Health Ministry says at least 87 people were killed by an Israeli airstrike in northern Gaza on Sunday, adding that 40 civilians were among the dead. The estimated toll brings the number of Palestinians killed or missing in Gaza since Friday night to more than 100. Now, this latest attack comes despite hopes for a ceasefire by Western and Arab nations following the death of Sinwar. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Saturday that Israel was determined to achieve all its war objectives and change the security reality in its region. So where is this deadly war headed, and what are the potential repercussions to the international community? For answers to this, we connect to Park Hyun-do, a professor at the Sagang Eurometa Institute. Welcome to the show, Professor Park.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And we're also joined by Robert Lawrence, assistant professor at Dongdak Women's University Online. Great to have you, Professor Lawrence.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's begin with Professor Lawrence. Like I said in our introduction, at least 87 people were killed in Saturday's Israeli airstrike on the city of Beit Lahia. How did you see this? Was the attack anticipated? And looking ahead, what kind of future scenarios do you foresee for the Middle East?
Okay, well, it's extremely difficult to ascertain the necessary information to make a good assessment on what happened in Beit Lahia on Saturday night. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza came out with numbers pretty quickly, and Israel and Hamas disagree on the numbers, which is a pattern we've seen repeated time and time again over the last year. Until we have enough information about the civilian deaths and the actual target of the attack, it's tough to assess the situation. But of course, if there were indeed 40 civilians killed, then that would be tragic. As far as future scenarios go, and putting some of this into context, there have been a variety of escalatory activity from all actors involved in the last week. So the outlook is pretty dangerous, to be honest. On the other hand, you had the head of Shin Bet in Cairo for talks on a hostage deal yesterday, while U.S. diplomats are being sent to the region to try to secure some sort of hostage deal or ceasefire before the election. But I fear that we're not really going to see a clear path forward until the scope and the direction of the Israeli retaliation for the Iranian missile attack, it kind of plays itself out, And of course, we're going to have to see what the Iranian response is. So until we see the results of this round of escalation between Iran and Israel, I don't think we're going to have a clear view of things.
Right. And Professor Lawrence, before this, Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar was killed on October 16th. Now, this comes after the death of former Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh. What kind of impact will the leadership vacuum within Hamas have on its internal cohesion?
Yeah. Well, certainly, with the death of Yahya Sinwar, there's going to be some jockeying for positioning within Hamas. He was both the military and the political leader of the movement. And for many Hamas members, he was a bit revered because of his relationship with Sheikh Yassin, who is the founder of Hamas, and his uncompromising approach to the Hamas cause. The death of Sinwar is a big blow to Hamas, but he is replaceable. I think sometimes people get that confused. Politically speaking, he only led the movement for a few months. And therefore, he was unlikely to have forged any path dependency that would limit the Shura Council's capacity to choose the most pragmatic candidate, depending on how they want to move forward. One likely candidate is Khalil al-Hayya, who's an exiled leader with close ties to Iran. Another is Khalid Mashal, but there's some difficulties with his past political posturing that might complicate his ascendancy. Militarily speaking, his brother, Mohammed Sinwar, is a likely successor, and he's a very capable military leader. He was in charge of the Khan Yunis brigade, and he was head of logistics and manpower for Hamas. So, Hamas as a whole, for its part, it's said that Sinwar's death is only going to strengthen the cause and their resolve, and it's shaping his narrative as a martyr who fought to the very end in an attempt to try to get like a rally around the flag effect, I believe. So I think all in all, I don't see the vacuum being as big as some people hoped it would be. I'm not sure that there's as much space to maneuver in as people hoped there would be.
Now, what about Professor Park? In the wake of Sinwar's death, Khalid Mashal, like Professor Lawrence just mentioned, has reportedly taken on a leadership role in Hamas. And can you remind our viewers who is Khalid Mashal and who is likely to become a next official leader?
Khalid Mashal actually was a very influential the leader within the Hamas, and he has led the Hamas political bureau from 1996 to 2017, and until he was replaced by Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed again by the Israeli government, actually, in Iran. So he is about 6 years older than Yahya Sinwar, and most of his life, actually, he spent his life outside of Palestine, the Gaza. So probably even though he tried to get in touch with a lot of people and with the people in the Gaza, but nevertheless, he is less popular, I would say, than the Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar is quite popular because actually he has always contact with the people in Gaza. But the Khalid Mashal actually spent most of his life outside of the Palestine, and also he did not have a good relationship after the civil war broke out in Syria, and he didn't have any good relationship with Iran or Syria. So he has kind of a problem with the Iranian government and also Syria. But nevertheless, now he's acting head of the Hamas, but we don't know who will actually be elected as a new chief. But anyway, the Yahya Sinwar is also, as Professor Lawrence mentioned, actually any leader is replaceable. And the leader is important, but leader is then much important. Actually, the spirit of the opposition and resistance would be very important, and that spirit will go on and on, and as long as Hamas is alive.
Right. So, regardless of who the leader becomes, the regional atmosphere would stay still for the meantime. Now, there's also speculation that Sinwar's body could be used as leverage in negotiations for the release of Israeli hostages. Professor Park, what is your perspective on this potential development?
I don't think it is quite actually negotiable. I don't think the body of the Yahya Sinwar is that much important for the Hamas movement right now. And Hamas would not actually would not release the Israeli hostages in exchange for the body of Yahya Sinwar. So I think probably it is very difficult to use the body of Yahya Sinwar as a bargaining chip for the Israeli government. Probably Israeli government needs to think twice. Right now, the Hamas has nothing to lose right now, so they would not stop actually the provocating or resisting against Israel. The forces, the Israeli government. So the use of the Yahya Sinwar's body as a bargaining chip is not actually will not work as far as I know.
Now, on October 18th, Hezbollah, which forms part of the axis of resistance with Hamas, attacked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence with drones. Professor Lawrence, what implications does this have for the regional dynamics in the Middle East?
Right. So, they sent drones into Caesarea, where Netanyahu's house is, and this is playing out very interestingly in the media. Iran has come out publicly and put the blame squarely on the shoulders of Lebanese Hezbollah, while Israel is blaming and threatening Iran. So this is a bit dangerous regionally because it could be used as an excuse to widen the scope of the retaliation for the October 1st missile attack on Israel. In the wake of this attack on Netanyahu's home, some of the more hawkish members of the Knesset, the legislative body in Israel, they've explicitly called for the retaliation to include strategic facilities and political and military elite. So naturally, if Israel were to escalate in such a fashion, it would be met with a retaliation from Iran, which could summon the expansion of the conflict into a greater regional conflict. So it's a dangerous attempt, and it raises the possibility of a wider regional war.
Right, that sounds very concerning at this point. Now, despite this developments, there had been increased calls for a ceasefire in Gaza following Sinwar's death. However, the warring parties have shown little interest in responding to this. Professor Park, why? What does each party really want to pursue ultimately?
Hamas actually goes further and further. Actually, there is no stopping on the part of the Hamas. Actually, they would continue to resist against the Israeli government. And also Israel actually right now has all the chances to make a peace with the Hamas, but I don't think that Prime Minister Netanyahu would do so. And right now, the body is in the court of the United States. So the Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, is set to travel again to the Middle East to make a peace possible. But I think that is also very difficult to achieve. Right now, probably the Democratic government of the United States would like to see the ceasefire achieved. But nevertheless, Hamas nor Israeli government is set to do so. Particularly, Mr. Netanyahu would continue the attack and also make actually the situation much more difficult for ceasefire until at least the American presidential election day on the 5th of November. So things will be changing after the election, but before the election, I don't think there will be any ceasefire.
Then, Professor, can I just ask a quick question? Why is the American election date very important for them? Can you help us elaborate? Yes.
I think probably Mr. Netanyahu would like to see Mr. Trump get elected. Because actually Trump has been very friendly with Mr. Netanyahu, and Netanyahu will get a lot actually if Mr. Trump is elected. The Democratic Party, particularly the Biden-Harris team, actually has been very helpful for the Israel to attack and also the avenge the Hamas. But nevertheless, Mr. Netanyahu does not like the new president, actually, the Harris, because Harris is no different from Mr. Obama, the former president, because Mr. Obama was very pessimistic and very actually negative about the Mr. Netanyahu. And Netanyahu knows too well that if the Harris is elected, there is less room for Israel to actually maneuver in terms of Palestinian matters.
Right. And in relation to this, Israel gave the United States a document last week with its conditions for a diplomatic solution to the end of the war in Lebanon. Professor Lawrence, can you tell us, for the sake of our viewers, what did it ask for? And what do you think are the chances of the U.S. and the international community accepting the offer?
Okay, so it appears that Israel, as a part of any diplomatic solution to the war in Lebanon, wants the IDF to be able to engage in active enforcement to prevent Hezbollah from reconstituting its infrastructure close to the Israeli border. And it also wants its Air Force to have the capacity to operate inside of Lebanese airspace. So this is in reference to UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which concluded the 2006 Hezbollah-Israel war. So, this resolution basically stated that the area between the Litani River and the Blue Line, which is the demarcation line between Lebanon and Israel, can only be used by the Lebanese army and UN interim forces. Israel's argument is that those forces haven't done their jobs in keeping Hezbollah out. And if those forces do their jobs, then and keep Hezbollah out of the area, the IDF will do less, and vice versa. As far as this proposal's acceptance goes, to be honest, I really doubt that Lebanon is going to accept this, or anybody else in the international community. It sounds awfully like an occupation. The U.S. would prefer to elevate the status of the Lebanese military, and that's part of this push as well, I think. In order to make them the primary security apparatus for the country, and thus that degrades Hezbollah's position in the country. But for the time being, I think this is wishful thinking. We've heard a lot in the media and in think tanks about this opportunity to kind of put the Lebanese state back in control of Lebanon and dismiss the non-state actor of Hezbollah and its control over Lebanon. But I really think that right now Hezbollah is still the dominant force in the country. So I think it's going to be tough to actually make that happen.
Right. So it sounds like the conflict is going to be ongoing for the meantime. Then, speaking of which, what are the potential long-term consequences of this conflict for the stability of the Middle East?
Well, we'll have to see how things pan out over the next couple weeks or days. We're all still awaiting the Israeli response to the missile attacks and then the counter response by Iran. This could manifest itself in several ways. If they hit oil infrastructure, for example, then the retaliation could go to Gulf countries, which could widen the conflict. So there are a lot of variables in play that could change the direction and thus the regional security because of the conflict. But I would argue that there are at least two long-term consequences that seem apparent to most observers. One is that Iran's forward defense, which is their policy that messes in resistance, right? It's been severely depleted, but not destroyed over the last year. Hamas is a shadow of itself. Hezbollah's leadership and military capacity have been reduced. And just in the last week, the Houthis took a big hit with the U.S. B-2 stealth bombers hitting storage facilities. And this changes other regional actors' strategies and how to deal with Iran's regional hegemonic ambitions. Another consequence that I think is going under the radar right now, dangerously under the radar, is that this conflict is taken away from a very serious problem in a resurgent IS. The Islamic State no longer holds territory and collects taxes the way it did back in 2014, 2015, but it's still a very viable terrorist and insurgent organization, and it's reconstituting itself in Syria. They've carried out over 500 attacks in Syria this year alone. They thrive in chaos, and this conflict certainly works as a recruiting tool for them. So from a security and stability standpoint, I think this is something that the world really needs to pay attention to, because in 2014 there was a lot of surprise. People didn't necessarily see IS coming the way the way they came, and I think right now the pieces of the puzzle are all there, and it's a dangerous situation.
Right. So it's concerning that this conflict could lead to more and expand its size. Now, another conflict that's been persisting is the Russia-Ukraine war. Professor Park, how do you see the conflict between Israel and Hamas influencing Russia's military and political calculations in Eastern Europe?
I think that probably without the Ukraine war, probably Russia would have a better chance to talk about a lot of things in the Middle East, what is going on. But right now, Russia is tied. Russia's hands is tied. Actually, not much room for the Russia to maneuver right now. So I don't think the Israeli-Hamas war, the Israeli-Hamas war actually restrained the movement of the Russia, particularly. Because the lack of the troops and lack of the weapons and a lot of actually money and weapons are going into the Ukraine. So the Russia has a hard time dealing with Ukraine. So in a sense, because the Russia is too busy dealing with the Ukraine, it doesn't have any capacity to deal with Middle Eastern situation, and that is actually the Israel and United States actually take a good advantage of the difficulties Russia is right now facing.
Right. Then what about the rest of the world? What kind of impact might the Middle East conflict have on global oil prices, and also how could that affect economies like South Korea?
Well, as long as Israel would not actually make the war bigger and wider, I don't think there will be any problem. But there is a rumor today actually that Israel would strike oil facilities in Iran. So if the Israel is ready to strike the oil facilities, actually very soon, then that would be a very hellish, actually, not only for Korea, but also for the whole world. So I hope actually the Israel would restrain, but there is no country can possibly stop right now Israel, particularly recently, the Hezbollah drone attack was made on the home of the Mr. Netanyahu, and right now Israel likes to retaliate. So before that drone incident, Israel actually promised to United States that we would not target oil or nuclear facilities, but suddenly it changed. I don't know whether Israel would really dare to attack oil facilities in Iran, but if so, then that would be a very difficult situation, actually, the Korea and the whole world would face.
Right. Now, given this complexities of both the Middle East conflict and the war in Ukraine, Professor Lawrence, what do you believe is the most critical step that the international community should take to promote lasting peace and stability in both regions?
That's the magic question in a way, I guess.
It's magic.
I'm a bit hesitant to say too much about the Russo-Ukrainian war because it's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. Regarding Israel and its conflicts with Iran and Iran's regional proxies, I won't pretend to know what kind of current negotiations are going on behind closed doors and the intricacies of current state-to-state and multilateral talks because I'm not privy to the actual information. But I would argue that I think the most important thing the international community can do right now is read more and listen to people who disagree with you so that the global community understands the complexities of the conflict and can have a more nuanced conversation about how to fix it. When we see a lot of the protests going on, or even sometimes the conversations going on in the UN, it kind of seems like two groups of people talking past each other with the talking points from their respective echo chambers, and it isn't working. I think, honestly, the global community, we need to read more, listen more, and for those of us lucky enough to live in democracies, make your voice heard.
Right. Professor Park, do you have any last words?
Simple, ceasefire. That is the best way.
Right. Let's hope for also a ceasefire and at least for the war not to expand to a bigger scale. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now that wraps up our program for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.